Ancient teeth show evidence of food that didn't exist then. Not everything we discover in the past fits neatly into the story we've built about it.
Sometimes, a small detail appears quiet, almost insignificant, and then refuses to make sense no matter how closely we look at it.
This is one of those cases. Because deep inside the hardened layers of ancient human teeth, researchers found chemical traces of something that should not have been there. Not rare. Not unusual. Impossible.
Food compounds that, according to everything we know about history, agriculture, and human movement, simply did not exist in that place, at that time. The discovery began like many others, with routine analysis.
Teeth are often studied because they act as biological records.
Over time, microscopic particles from food become trapped in plaque, mineralizing into a substance that can survive for thousands of years. This hardened layer preserves tiny fragments of a person's diet, offering a direct link to what they consumed during their lifetime. For archaeologists, it's one of the most reliable ways to reconstruct ancient eating habits. So when researchers examined a set of teeth recovered from a burial site dated to several thousand years ago, they expected to find familiar patterns, grains, local plants, maybe traces of early domesticated crops.
And at first, that's exactly what they saw. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing stood out. Until it did.
Buried within the sample, among the expected residues, were molecular signatures that didn't belong.
At first, they were dismissed as contamination. That's the most common explanation when something doesn't fit. Modern particles can easily find their way into ancient samples through handling, storage, or environmental exposure. It's a known problem, and scientists are trained to be cautious.
But when the tests were repeated carefully, under stricter conditions, the same compounds appeared again.
And again. Consistent. Stable.
Embedded within the mineral structure in a way that suggested they had been there from the beginning.
That's when the problem became unavoidable.
Because the compounds being detected were associated with foods that, according to historical timelines, had not yet been cultivated, processed, or even introduced to that region. Some of these markers pointed toward plant species believed to have been domesticated thousands of years later.
Others suggested chemical processes, fermentation, refinement that required techniques not thought to exist at the time. It wasn't just a mismatch. It was a contradiction of the entire framework used to understand ancient diets. Naturally, researchers turned to the most grounded explanation first. Perhaps the dating was wrong. If the remains were younger than originally believed, the presence of these compounds could be explained. Radiocarbon analysis was rechecked. Multiple samples were tested independently. The results didn't change. The teeth were exactly as old as initially estimated. That option closed quickly. Next came the possibility of trade. Human societies have always been more connected than we assume. Even in ancient times, goods and materials moved across long distances through complex networks. It's possible that certain foods arrived in regions earlier than we currently believe. But this explanation has limits. Trade leaves traces, artifacts, records, patterns of distribution. And in this case, there was no supporting evidence that these specific food sources existed anywhere near that timeline, let alone that they were being transported and consumed. Which led to a more complicated question. What if the timeline itself isn't as fixed as we think? What if certain forms of food cultivation or processing appeared earlier, in isolated contexts, and then disappeared without leaving a lasting impact? It's not impossible.
Human history is full of lost techniques, forgotten practices, and innovations that never spread widely enough to be recorded. If a small group developed a method of preparing or accessing these foods, and that group later vanished, the only evidence might be something like this: it trapped in the teeth of a single individual.
But even that doesn't explain everything. Because some of the detected compounds don't just suggest early access, they suggest a level of refinement. A process. Something deliberate. And that raises the question of knowledge. Not just what people ate, but what they understood. What they knew how to do. The ability to transform raw materials into something chemically distinct requires experimentation, observation, repetition.
It implies a system of knowledge that doesn't match the simplicity we often associate with ancient societies. At this point, the investigation moves deeper into chemical analysis. Researchers began isolating specific molecules, mapping their structures, comparing them to known databases of plant and food chemistry. The results were precise.
These weren't vague similarities.
They were direct matches to compounds found in foods that should not have existed in that context. It was as if a fragment of a different timeline had been inserted into this one. This is where the theories began to diverge.
One interpretation suggested that our understanding of ancient agriculture is incomplete.
That certain crops or food sources may have existed in forms we haven't yet discovered, or in regions we haven't yet studied. Another proposed that environmental factors could have caused local plants to develop chemical properties similar to those found in later domesticated species.
In other words, these weren't the same foods, but they behaved like them at a molecular level.
And then there was a more subtle idea. That what we're seeing isn't about the food itself, but about the interaction between food and biology. The human body processes substances in complex ways. Under certain conditions, it can transform compounds into forms that resemble others. If the individual had a unique metabolism shaped by genetics, environment, or health, it's possible that the chemical traces in their teeth reflect not just what they ate, but how their body processed it. To explore this, scientists looked beyond the teeth and into the surrounding remains.
Bone chemistry, isotopic signatures, trace elements, all of it was analyzed to build a more complete picture.
And what they found added another layer to the mystery. The individual's diet, overall, appeared relatively normal for the time.
There were no extreme indicators of unusual food consumption.
No evidence of a radically different lifestyle. Which made the presence of those specific compounds even harder to explain. They weren't part of a broader pattern. They were isolated signals. Imagine sitting down to eat something that, by all accounts, shouldn't exist yet. Not because it's futuristic or advanced, but because it belongs to a different point in history. You wouldn't notice anything strange. It would taste normal. Feel normal. But thousands of years later, that single act would leave behind a trace that challenges everything we think we know about time, development, and human behavior. There's a tendency to look at the past as something fixed, mapped out, understood, categorized.
But discoveries like this remind us that it's more fragile than that. More incomplete.
We build timelines based on the evidence we have, and then we assume those timelines are solid.
But what if they're not? What if they're just the best approximations we can make, given the fragments we've found so far? Because in the end, this isn't just about food. It's about assumption. About how easily we accept that we understand the sequence of human development, the order in which things appeared, the pace at which knowledge spread. And how quickly that confidence can be shaken by something as small as a microscopic particle trapped in a tooth. I remember thinking about how much of our daily life will eventually disappear without a trace. The meals we eat, the habits we follow, the small details that feel ordinary. Most of it won't be preserved. And if it is, it will be incomplete. Misinterpreted. Seen through the lens of a future that doesn't fully understand us. Maybe that's what we're looking at here. Not a mistake. Not an anomaly. But a moment perfectly normal at the time. That no longer fits into the story we've constructed. And that leaves us with a question that doesn't have a simple answer. Not what was found, but how many other things like this exist, waiting to be noticed. Hidden in plain sight, inside samples we've already collected, inside data we've already recorded. Because sometimes, the past doesn't change. Our understanding of it does. Not everything in the past is recorded, and sometimes, what survives is just a fragment. A tiny, almost invisible remnant of lives that no longer exist. After confirming the anomalous compounds in the teeth, the researchers were faced with a profound dilemma. These traces could not be explained by known agriculture, trade, or diet of the period. And yet, they existed.
That one individual had consumed or processed something that should not have been available to them, and the evidence remained intact, locked within the hardened layers of their teeth. The investigation expanded beyond the teeth themselves. Every aspect of the individual's remains was analyzed, isotopic signatures in bone to reconstruct overall diet, trace elements to detect environmental exposures, and chemical residues to determine whether any other unusual compounds were present. Surprisingly, the broader diet appeared entirely normal. Grains, local plants, and the expected spectrum of foods dominated the chemical landscape.
The anomaly was isolated, embedded in a single molecular footprint.
It was not part of a broader trend, but a solitary signal, silent yet insistent, whispering of a knowledge lost to time.
At this stage, researchers began asking questions that went beyond biology and chemistry. What did it mean for humans to interact with substances in ways we do not yet understand? Could this indicate that knowledge about fermentation, processing, or chemical transformation existed briefly in a small, isolated context? Perhaps it never spread, never became mainstream, leaving only this microscopic echo behind. And if so, how many other practices, techniques, and innovations have vanished entirely, leaving no trace in our historical record? The team also considered the role of human cognition. Transforming raw materials into chemically distinct compounds requires observation, experimentation, and repetition. It implies that the people who did this had a system of understanding and knowledge, something more than instinctual consumption. And that understanding challenges our assumptions about ancient societies, about their capabilities and limitations. Perhaps the past was not as simple as we thought. Perhaps human curiosity, experimentation, and ingenuity existed long before we expected, leaving only fleeting traces in unexpected places. The discovery also raised a more subtle question. What if our understanding of history is too rigid? We assume linear progression, categorizing innovations and discoveries according to timelines that are themselves constructed from incomplete evidence. Yet here was a reminder that the past is messy, fragile, and often contradictory. A single individual, a single act, a single particle can disrupt the neat chronology we rely on. And it forces us to accept that our knowledge is provisional, subject to revision as new evidence emerges, no matter how small or obscure. In pondering this, the researchers were struck by the fragility of human memory and history. Most of what we do each day leaves no trace. Meals, rituals, habits, techniques vanish, forgotten, unrecorded. Occasionally, something survives, a fragment of pottery, a skeleton, a molecule preserved in enamel. But even that fragment is incomplete, open to interpretation, a puzzle piece without a reference image. The anomaly in this individual's teeth was such a fragment, a puzzle piece that defied placement, yet demanded attention, curiosity, and reflection. It also forces a reflection on human perception of knowledge. We like to believe that history is mapped, understood, and ordered. We create timelines and frameworks that feel complete. But discoveries like this remind us that history is never fixed. It exists in fragments, in anomalies, in traces that challenge everything we think we know. And sometimes, the smallest details, the molecules trapped in teeth, the overlooked fragments, the silent evidence, hold the most profound insights. They remind us to question assumptions, to probe deeper, and to remain open to the possibility that the past is far stranger than we imagine. Imagine, for a moment, sitting down to eat something that, by all conventional understanding, shouldn't exist yet. For the person who did it, it was ordinary, unremarkable, everyday life. Yet thousands of years later, that simple act becomes a challenge to everything we believe about history, agriculture, and human ingenuity. It is a humbling reminder that ordinary moments can leave extraordinary traces, challenging our perception of time, progress, and knowledge. In the end, this story is not only about food or molecules. It is about assumptions, about curiosity, and about the limits of what we think we know. Each discovery, each anomaly, is a reminder that the past is not fully captured, that our understanding is always incomplete, and that history is not a fixed narrative, but a living puzzle made of fragments, waiting to be discovered and questioned. If this story made you reconsider the past,
How much we really know, how much might be missing, and how a single small trace can challenge our entire understanding, then like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because the most interesting part of these discoveries is not just what they reveal, but the questions they leave us with, and the mysteries that remain to be explored.